The last one, and the most important, was the king's personal guard.
Kaijin had been head of the engineering corps, and Vesta had been his second in command. He was the son of a marquis, the dwarf moaned. A noble title he bought with money. I think he must have been jealous of a commoner like me taking the head role. It was complicated, you know?
It must have been humiliating to him, taking orders from someone below him. And I'll admit that I didn't care much about what other people thought about me.
I was too busy trying to stay on the king's good side. That's when it happened. The magic armor affair.
At the time, the engineering corps was seen as the lowest of the army's 7 departments, barely producing any new technology for itself. Vesta believed a kingdom rich in technology should have an appropriately famous corps of engineers, while Kaijin was more of a status quo man when it came to research and development. Despite how intense their arguments got, they never managed to reach an agreement during their countless garrison meetings. Along the way, the corps launched a so-called magic armor soldier project with a team of elf engineers. Vesta was hellbent on making this project a success and boosting the corps' position in the military pecking order. Kaijin warned him that he was proceeding too quickly with it, but even then, Vesta had little time for the advice of a common-born man. In the end, thanks to Vesta's arbitrary whims, an experiment went awry and led to a spirit magic corps running out of control, a very public failure and a bad setback for the project at an early stage. Thus, despite some of the greatest minds of the world working on it, the magic armor project ground to a halt. As head of the engineering corps, Kaijin wound up taking the heat for it, resigning from his position in the army. Not only did Vesta make Kaijin the scapegoat, he even convinced his friends among the higher-ranked leaders to give false testimony against him. That, according to Kaijin at least, was the truth. Once he finished, Kaijin let out a tired sigh.
I could understand his perspective. There must have been a lot of resentment built up over the years from that.
Still, man, Vesta's just a total storybook villain, isn't he?
They don't come easier to spot than that.
As far as the minister was concerned, Kaijin could make a comeback in the military and threaten his position at any time.
That kind of thing.
Didn't he deserve the death penalty, really? Maybe not, but... So, Kaijin concluded, maybe he'll settle down a bit if I leave the country for a while.
He sounded a bit forlorn about it, but at least he had backup.
The 3 brothers with us were just as aware of the truth, and there was no love lost for Vesta among them, either.
Hell, even I hated him now.
Still, Kaijin did sock a noble, so I kind of wondered whether they were just gonna release us and wave goodbye. I wouldn't worry about it, Kaijin reassured me. I'm out of the army now, but I did make it up to the corps leader. As far as my social position goes, I'm just below Baron.
If it was strictly commoner versus nobleman in the courts, well, hanging might have entered the picture. He accentuated that morbid fact with a hearty laugh.
Meanwhile, I just sat there. If things got rough, I'd hightail it out of here, but otherwise, I was happy being a good little slime until cooler heads prevailed. Our day in court arrived soon after, and the entire lot of us were brought in front of the monarch.
The heroic king of the dwarves.
Now that I was seeing him in person, his stately aura was almost awe-inspiring. His Majesty Garzel Dwago closed his eyes and sat deeply upon his throne. He was stocky, dwarf-like in appearance, and his exposed armor-like muscles positively radiated energy. His skin was a deep, dark brown, and his black hair was pulled back on his head.
He exuded pure strength.
My fight-or-flight instincts kicked in all the way for the first time in ages.
2 knights were stationed near him, one on each side.
They were equally muscle-bound, no doubt, but they still looked wispy compared to their ruler.
Seriously, this guy was a monster. I'd been planning to beat a hasty retreat if I needed to, but now. Not so much. The moment I was placed in front of him, my every nerve was wound-taut.
It might have been the first time in this world that I actually sensed a clear danger to myself.
A man knelt in front of the king, checking over something with him.
After receiving permission, he stood up and read the affidavit.
We will now begin the trial. Silence, everyone. For the next hour, both sides presented their cases.
As criminal suspects, we weren't allowed to speak. In the royal court, That right was reserved for those with the rank of Earl or greater. Otherwise, you needed the king's express permission.
If you did speak out of turn, that apparently proved your guilt on the spot and earned you a bonus contempt of court charge. Whether you were innocent or not, that was the way this place worked. We were stuck having our representatives speak for us.
He had paid us a few visits during our 2 days in custody, discussing the nature of our case. Our kind of lawyer, basically. Could we trust him, though? Anxieties like that had a tendency to crop up for a reason. So there Sylvester was, he continued, sitting back at this club and enjoying an alcoholic beverage, when this gang pushed their way into the place and exposed him to dreadful violence. This is not the kind of behavior that should ever be forgiven.
Is that the truth? It is, my liege. I heard it from Kaijin himself, and I also have written testimony from the owners of the club.
There can be no mistaking the course of events that night.
What? What did he just say?
I thought he was on our side, and it took all of 5 minutes for him to go turncoat.
That can't be good, can it?
I shot a look at Kaijin, his face turned bright red, then slowly began draining of color.
I'll bet.
Our lawyer wasn't even bothering to make excuses for us.
It went without saying that representatives for the accused weren't allowed to lie in court. If they were found out, that would be another hanging.
It was impossible to think any would-be lawyer would attempt it, barring extreme circumstances, and yet ours was doing it right in front of us. My liege, Vesta exclaimed, egging him on.
You have heard it for yourself. I beg of you to deal with these miscreants harshly. He flashed us a smile of supreme confidence.
Bastard.
Maybe I should have hit him after all.
The king remained motionless, eyes closed.
In his place, one of the guards beside him spoke.
Order.
I will now give the verdict.
Kaijin, the mastermind behind this crime, is sentenced to 20 years of labor in the mines.
His accomplices are sentenced to 10 years of labor in the mines.
With that, this court is hereby. Wait, a deep, quiet voice interrupted. The king opened his eyes and looked at Kaijin. It has been a while, Kaijin.
Do you remain in good health?
Yes, my liege.
Came the instant reply. Presumably he had the right to speak now. It gladdens me that you remain so as well.
Yes.
Now, do you and your friends looking at us, have any desire to return to us? The audience in the royal court murmured among themselves. It must have been an unusual development. Vesta immediately blanched. Our traitorous representative, meanwhile, had developed a deathly pallor.
I beg your forgiveness, my liege, but I have already found a master to serve. I have made my vow, and it has become my treasure. A treasure so fine that, indeed, not even the direct order of my liege could make me part with it.
This clearly angered the audience. I could see the guards staring daggers into Kaijin's forehead.
But he stood strong, chest puffed out, the picture of dignity.
The king, seeing this, closed his eyes again.
I see.
Silence ruled for another moment. I have made my decision. Listen well to my sentence. Kaijin and his friends are hereby exiled from the kingdom.
After midnight tonight, when the new day comes, they are officially no longer welcome in my lands. That is all.
Begone at once.
Opening his eyes, the king made his proclamation in a loud voice.
Ah, the dignity of a born leader. His overwhelming presence sent shivers through my body.
Although, being king around here seemed like a terribly lonely job to have.
So there we were, after the trial, back at Kaijin's shop. That little celebratory drink we wanted to get sure broke bad, didn't it? Now we had to pack up and leave for good.
Oh, wait, is Gobta all right? We're still only at day 3 with him, right? I was a tad nervous about that as I opened the door to his punishment room. Ooh. Welcome back, sir.
Did you have fun?
Gee, sure hope you take me with you next time.
There he was, leaping up off the sofa to greet me. How did that happen?
He couldn't have gotten out of my spider silk that easy. Taking another look, I realized that the cushion Gobta had been using on the sofa was actually a tempest wolf. Wait, seriously? He actually summoned the guy?
Gobta, how'd you get that wolf in here?
Oh. Right. That. I just thought to myself, hey, can you come on over, please?
And he did, sir. He made it sound so easy, the bastard.
None of the other hobgoblins had managed the feat from such a long range before. Maybe his brain cells were all devoted to his natural talents instead of, actual intelligence.
It seemed crazy to me. I concluded that it must have been a coincidence.
I then realized that the sight of the Tempest Wolf had frozen the dwarves in their tracks.
What's wrong? I asked. We need to start packing, don't we? Wait a second. The panicked Kaijin replied. What on earth is a black direwolf doing in here?
Yeah.
You need to run. That's a B-ranked monster. And now they were panicking.
They looked so ridiculous, I was actually amused. Oh, he's fine. Really?
No problem.
He's like a big dog, really.
We keep him indoors and everything.
My attempts at calming everyone's nerves met stony silence. Black direwolves, by the way, were a somewhat advanced version of regular direwolves. If they evolved in a more magic-oriented fashion, their fur would turn black. The coats of the Tempest direwolves were black as well, but with a uniquely colored sheen. Direwolves weren't really supposed to evolve toward the storm element in the first place, that was just a side effect of the name I gave out. In volcanic regions, direwolves would evolve with a fire element and become red direwolves. Near bodies of water, you would find blue direwolves. In the forests would be green direwolves. In other words, adopting elements was a fairly common evolutionary pattern for these guys. The magic-infused black ones, meanwhile, were apparently a notorious threat to any nearby humans and humanoids. The Tempest element gave our wolf pack an ever so slight purplish shine to their black color, something you wouldn't notice if you weren't paying attention. Sorry I spooked the dwarves, I guess.
We didn't have the time for me to explain the whole story.
I'll just call him Gobta's pet for now and move on. After hurriedly pressing the dwarves to put on their best traveler's outfits, I pushed them out of the shop, went back in by myself, and proceeded to swallow up the entire contents of the building. Capacity-wise, I was still A-okay, but swallowing the building whole would probably have drawn a little too much attention, so I kept it at that. Once our preparations for the journey were complete, we made our way to where Riga and the other goblins were waiting. The space was silent, a far cry from the loud arguing of a moment ago. After the 5 accused had all but fled from the court, nobody in attendance dared move an inch.
Vesta nervously swallowed. The persistent silence of the king put both him and everyone else on edge. Then Gazelle shattered the stillness. Now, Vesta. Do you have anything you wish to say?
1,000 pardons, my liege, but this is all a misunderstanding.
It simply must be a mistake. Vesta's voice was a nervous warble as he pleaded his case. The king regarded him coldly, betraying none of his emotions.
A misunderstanding? If it is, then it has cost me one of my most faithful servants.
How can you say such a thing, my liege?
You call what he offered to you faithfulness?
Why, he is simply a man off the street. Vesta, I see you are mistaken. Kaijin left my core on his own volition. When I speak of a faithful servant I have lost, I refer to you. The minister's heart raced. I need to find an excuse. But his mind was blank. The words refused to come to his lips. His thoughts were slow to form. What did he just say? He referred to me? Then. Let me ask you once again, Vesta. Do you have anything you wish to say?
Fear, pure fear, dominated Vesta's head.
The king had asked him a question. He needed to reply. But all his speech had abandoned him. My liege, I am afraid, I had great expectations for you, Vesta. I have been waiting for so long.
Even during the magic armor affair, I waited for you to finally speak the truth.
And now I find that, yet again.
The expression Gazelle showed Vesta could almost be described as one of kindness. The king's words pierced through the minister like the sharpest of swords.
Look at these.
The king pointed out 2 items one of his attendants had produced. Vesta, eyes hollow, looked at them.
One was a sphere filled with a liquid that he had never seen before, the other was a single longsword.
Do you know what these are?
The liquid remained a mystery to Vesta, but the longsword he remembered. Kaijin had brought it in. You may explain to him, the king ordered his attendant.
The following speech took a fairly long time for Vesta to fully understand. The liquid was a life-regenerating elixir, a near-perfect extract of the juices of the hippocute herbs.
A so-called full potion, named for its miraculous recovery properties.
Even with the best technology the dwarves had at their fingertips, the purest extract they could produce topped off at 98%.
That made it only as potent as a high potion. This liquid, meanwhile, was at 99%. Vesta's face twisted in shock. He had to know.
What did they do to produce such a level of? But before he could ask, the attendant had even more shocking news for him. The longsword had a core of magisteel that was already working its way through the rest of the blade.
Impossible.
That process began only after a 10-year adaptation procedure.
The shock set Vesta's mind reeling. If this was true.
Both of these wonders were brought about by that slime, the king said. And thanks to your behavior, we have lost our connection to such a creature.
Do you have anything you wish to say?
Now Vesta realized the full extent of his king's rage.
There was truly nothing he could say. I do not, my liege. Tears began welling in his eyes. He knew it all too well now, his lord had abandoned him. All he wanted was to serve his king. To win his approval. That was it. When did I go wrong?
When I grew jealous of Kaijin, or before?
He didn't know. All he knew was that he had betrayed the king's trust.
I see.
In that case, Vesta, I hereby forbid you from entering the palace. Do not let me see you before me again. I shall leave you with this, I have tired of you. Hearing his words, Vesta stood up and bowed deeply to his lord. Then he left, setting off to pay his penance for his foolishness.
As he did, a guard ran forward and arrested the representative serving as Vesta's accomplice. The king watched them out of the corner of his eye. My dark agent,
he shouted with some urgency. Track the movements of that slime. Do not let it escape your notice.
Ever. The emphatic order of the normally taciturn king gave pause to everyone in the chamber.
By my life, my liege,
the dark agent said before disappearing.
The king thought to himself. Who was that slime?
A type of monster, no doubt. Was that the level of monster being released, then? His hero's instincts were giving him a feeling he couldn't ignore.
Trusting it, he began to take action. Riga and gang were all safe at the edge of the forest. Between this and that, we had spent a total of 5 days in the city, pretty much what we expected. Things didn't quite go according to plan, but we largely accomplished what we'd set out to do. Too bad we didn't get to hit the free guild in town.
It sounded kind of like an adventurers' club to me, the exact kind of place where an otherworlder or two might hang out.
It would have been nice to check out all the gilt and armor the dwarves were known for, too. But oh well. We had a bunch of master craftsmen with us here. That was enough of a find.
That, and I still had 20 gold pieces. Score. I took the time to introduce Kaijin and his hapless friends to the goblins.
We'd all be working together for a while to come, so I wanted to get off on the right foot.
Come to think of it, I didn't see much in the way of casual racism from the dwarves, most of them, anyway. Given the demi-magical origins we all shared, I suppose it made sense.
I could imagine us crossing their paths again someday. We were now more or less ready to roll. The only problem was transport. Ranga, of course, was wagging his tail, as if me hopping on him was the pinnacle of his life.
I explained to him that I needed his full 15-foot size for a bit so we could fit 2 out of the 3 brothers on his back.
Ranga was not a fan of this idea.
His face instantly turned sullen as he wobbled backward and plopped his ass on the ground. He glowered at the newcomers as if to suggest he could just eat them instead and save everyone a lot of trouble. The dwarves almost jumped out of their skin.
Even when they first saw him, they'd wailed in perfect unison.
Gah!
How could you ever?
And so forth. Either this was a well-practiced routine of theirs, or Ranga really did scare them that much.
There had to be something I could do.
Hang on, Ranga, I said. I tried transforming into one of you guys earlier, and I'd like to test out how it works a bit. That's why I want you to let these dwarves on, all right?
His head immediately shot up. I understand, my master.
Kaijin and Garm, eldest of the three brothers, would go on my back. Ranga would take Dold and Mildo. Once they were on, I'd spin some sticky thread to make sure they stayed on.
These guys did nearly 50 at their peak.
In this motorcycle-free world, the experience would probably make them pass out.
Not that I knew whether I could handle that speed or whether I wanted to. Now for me.
Mimic, Tempest Starwolf. Astounding. Your dazzling strength knows no bounds, my master. Ha ha ha.
Yeah, I'll bet.
And you'll look like this someday soon, if you keep it up.
We will do our best to live up to your lofty expectations, my master.
Ranga's eyes sparkled at this new mission in life.
The rest of the Tempest Wolves grew equally excited.
Always a good idea to motivate the troops a bit. So I turned to Kaijin and Garm to get them to hop on, and... well, that's weird.
They're all unconscious and foaming at the mouth.
What are these guys doing, anyway?
Oh well. I knew that practice would come in handy.
A little sticky thread off my back, and everyone was pulled up and put firmly in place. Success.
Fainted dwarves wouldn't make great traveling companions, but either way, we were off.
By the way, I intended to start off at a leisurely trot, only to find myself going over 60 miles per hour or so.
Maybe it was for the better that my passengers weren't awake to see this.
If they were, our acceleration would have made them lose their lunches.
I looked back at Dold and Mildo on Ranga's back. They had a little more backbone, or I thought they did.
Then I realized they were just unconscious with their eyes open.
My condolences. Putting the dwarves in the back of my mind, I proceeded down the path back home.
At least they wouldn't bite their tongues or whatnot if they were unconscious.
If I were them, I wouldn't want to wake up in the middle of this scream machine anyway.
It'd be better for everyone if they stayed asleep until it was all over. I'll feed 'em, of course, but... I really am mean to people, aren't I?
And speaking of which...
Riga. Have you ever successfully summoned one of the Black Wolves before?
I have not, so Rimuru, it embarrasses me to admit. He hadn't, and it was a point of frustration for the other goblins, too, not to mention their wolf partners. So why just Gobta?
Really?
Because I guess Gobta managed to. What?
Gobta, is that true?
Why yes.
I gave the call, and he came over for me. There was a fighting spirit in everyone's, and every dog's, eyes now.
It's not impossible, Riga reflected.
Gobta is strong enough to have done the Dwarven Kingdom journey round trip on foot once. Oh, right.
I thought he was a slobbering idiot, but apparently he was good in a pinch. He was an idiot, of course, but not useless.
Surviving a 4-month journey through the wilderness and foraging off the land wasn't something any old guy could do. He'd had to deal with monsters along the way, too, weak though they might have been. I placed Gobta a few rungs higher in my internal totem pole. He'd probably tumble right back down soon enough.
We decided to make camp once night fell.
I wasn't tired at all, but everyone else needed rest. I could test out my abilities in the meantime. A Tempest Starwolf, to say the least, was physically gifted.
I could practically feel the power pulsing inside me.
Just a light jump, and I was way up in the sky. On land, I tore up any path I found with my rapid sprint. Add on some quick reflexes, and it looked like I had what it took to make good use of this form. Most of my battles so far had involved me busting out a few water blades and ending it just like that. I hadn't thought about it much, But strength, and reflexes, were going to be a lot more important to me if things got hairy. On that front, the Tempest Starwolf seemed to have nearly everything I could want. With the sage's support, this wolf could probably insta-kill the black snake from back in that cave, no skills required. I'd learned in town that the lizard rated a B- in rank, and from there, I used the sage's simulation skills to figure out how the rest stacked up against it. It told me that the black snake wasn't even an A, and I could win against 10 of those centipedes at once, so I'd be an A- or so?
Sounds about right.
A Tempest Starwolf not under my control would be stronger than a black snake, though it probably couldn't take 10 at once. Although there was that weird dark lightning skill to think about. My instincts told me that one would pack a punch, so I'd test it out in slime form first.
That ought to temper it a little bit so I can observe it.
The dark lightning I unleashed was,
let's call it beyond belief. There was a flash, followed by a deafening roar of thunder. The large riverside boulder I chose as a target was gone, crumbled to pebbles.
I could see the bolt crashing down faster than light, but witnessing its dreadful force for myself simply amazed me.
Way beyond expectations. Ha. Let's pretend that didn't happen. I made my decision instantly.
Right.
I wasn't doing anything.
Just a little lightning storm.
Let's leave it at that. Seal it away for later, like the snake's poisonous breath. It'd be better if I saved it until I knew how to temper the strength of my attacks a little.
Besides, with all the internal magic that cost me, I'd better learn how to adjust things soon.
No tossing that around willy-nilly. I could wind up running out of magic in the middle of battle.
Given the range of that lightning strike, though, it could make a good ace in the hole someday. The entire 20-yard radius around the disintegrated boulder was now blazing hot and glassy.
Something to think about.
Rieger, of course, had a few hobgobs there in short order to find out what was going on. I told them it was just a rogue thunderbolt. Sorry for interrupting your sleep, guys. I'd need to save the more dangerous experimentation for some place where I could work in peace. Some soundproofing would be nice, too. Otherwise, it'd be hard to really flex my muscle.
Still, there was some more data to work with. I replayed the simulation in my mind.
According to the results, a Tempest Starwolf out of my control could use dark lightning and probably kill 10 black snakes at once.
Which meant the attack was probably past A rank.
The guidepost for an A rating was being able to destroy a small town, disaster level, in other words.
Better avoid that transformation around urban areas. My experiments continued, albeit a lot more quietly, until morning. The next day, I let Rieger and his people handle breakfast. Goblin food was, well, pretty simple. Just heat and eat. Haute cuisine it wasn't, not that I could taste it.
If I ever pick up that sense again, I'll have to teach them the finer points, I guess. Food one can look forward to is one of the first steps toward an advanced culture. Could these goblins really acclimatize to culture, though?
I thought so. I had no idea how, but I wanted to test out everything I could. If we got tripped up over cooking, that would be a bad start.
The dwarves were up, still white as sheets.
You all right? Why, yes. Where are we?
As they slowly shook out the cobwebs, they realized they were in unfamiliar territory.
It unnerved them.
I explained we were on our way to the village these goblins called home. What? That would be a journey of some 2 months, normally. We won't have enough food unless we procure a cart at some nearby town. It's a little late to be surprised about that, isn't it? I wanted to say, but, thinking about it, I hadn't really explained much to them, had I?
Things like how we got here and how fast we were going.
We weren't in a hurry today, so I decided to take the time to explain in detail about what we were doing.
Breakfast happened to be served right then.
It was just a few wild hares roasted whole, but it was more than enough stimulus for the dwarves' stomachs to start rumbling.
Guess they can keep food down, at least. As they ate, I reviewed our future plans. We would be at the village in another 2 days or so, I explained. No.
They whispered in unison, realizing exactly how fast those wolves were taking them.
"Hey, don't worry," I replied. "Once you get used to it, it's a breeze."
It'd be nice if they could get used to it, but I figured we'd probably reach the end of the journey before then.
We set off back down the road. Time to build a thought communication space for us.
Now that I'd done it a few times, it came naturally to me. The dwarves picked up on it, too, which was a relief.
Thought communication was a sort of high-level version of telepathy, letting you build links and talk with multiple people at once.
It also made things like strategy meetings easier for us.
It remained effective across a range of half a mile or so, which was more than enough for my purposes.
On the second day, the dwarves seemed largely capable of remaining on their rides without passing out. The force of the wind kept them from opening their eyes, so I built a sort of visor for them all from silk. Kind of like a helmet replacement, I suppose, and it seemed to do the trick. I also started noticing that I could control my sticky thread to some extent via telepathy. Once you got used to controlling magicules, it was amazing what you could do with them. Sticky thread probably wasn't the only thing I could apply that to, either.
These little particles were the essence of magic.
Either way, the dwarves were getting into the swing of things, and their makeshift helmets were having the effect I wanted.
I could talk with them now, and they were kind enough to teach me a thing or two about life in their kingdom as we rode on.
The goblins were listening in as well, chiming in about their own experiences, and we had a nice, friendly confab for much of the day. This should keep up in the village, too, I hoped.
Dwarves, being partially sprites, were extraordinarily long-lived. Goblins, being partially magic-born, were notoriously short-lived.
Evolution, or perhaps living conditions, had created a fairly large difference between the two. I sometimes wondered if goblins were actually a step down the evolutionary ladder. Hobgoblins, the next step up, seemed a bit like the monster equivalent of dwarves to me.
Like they had gone back to their ancestral roots, in a way, with a lot more magic force at their disposal.
I wouldn't know for sure, but I imagined the evolution did wonders for their lifespans as well. They still weren't the handiest, though, and there was a stark difference between monsters and fairies, but still. Dwarves, for their part, were probably more closely related to monsters than, say, elves, another sprite race. Maybe that would help these two species get along, too. As I suddenly remembered something else, I decided to bring it up. Kaijin. I know I'm a little late asking, but are you okay with this?
You really respected that king, didn't you?
Oh, that?
I did, yes. There isn't a dwarf alive who doesn't respect him.
Imagine having the hero of your nightly fairy tales serving as your actual king.
It was an interesting thing to consider, the mythical heroes of the past, still alive and kicking and protecting their people as king.
That would help me build a pretty healthy respect, yeah.
I'd want to support him, this ideal king, one who always did the right thing and never allowed room for mistakes. I wondered how much he had to sacrifice to maintain that ideal in reality. In a way, it was frightening. It took a lot of spirit, I'm sure, to be a leader like that. That was what made people believe in him. Was I ready for that? I had become, more or less, the master of this goblin village. But what comes after that?
Well, let me ask you this, then, Kaijin.
Why did you come with me?
Wouldn't it have been the best thing for your life if you rejoined the king?
Bah ha ha ha. Well.
A lot more sensitive than I thought, Rimuru?
I did it because it looked like fun. It was just instinct, you know?
Like, hey, this guy's gonna go out and do something. That's all the reason I needed, you know? Yeah. Maybe.
Fair enough. He's right. Hair, I retorted.
Well, don't come crying to me later if it turns sour.
I'm pretty well known for being mean to people. It was true. I did practically nothing by myself. I entrusted everything to others. But I did want to help. To be relied on. I wanted to be the sort of person who could manage that.
Oh, I know.
Kaijin replied. I nodded, satisfied. 2 days later, We arrived at the village on time. Mission accomplished. The girl and the hero. Tap, tap, tap.
Quiet steps echoed across the castle.
The demon lord had already fled, leaving his bastion behind him. I was the rear guard. A sacrificial lamb.
He used me like a tool right up to the end, showing me not a sliver of emotion along the way. The only kindness he ever showed me, I think, was when he called me by name.
Did I hate him for that? I honestly wasn't sure. Was it the will of Ifrit, the high-level flame elemental, that made me serve him, or was it mine? I still don't know. And I didn't mind being a sacrifice very much. Nothing seemed to matter anymore. It appeared that this castle was some kind of experimental facility.
Abandoning it, however, didn't seem to be any great loss in the demon lord's eyes.
What confused me was his goal in leaving me here.
I could have just withdrawn instead of engaging anyone who came, but he ordered me to stay.
Maybe he had some plan in mind, but his thoughts remained a mystery to me.
The one who arrived was a so-called hero. She had long dark silver hair tied behind her head, and her light equipment was colored a uniform shade of black. Her beauty rivaled the demon lord's.
The only difference was that she was a woman, a young one. The moment I laid eyes upon her, I knew it. I had no chance of winning. But I wanted to fight her to the end, not as a person, but as a magic born with powers of flame.
It's the least I can do, I thought, to make up for the sin of living all this time. My sword of concentrated flame was easily caught by the hero's own. My weapon burned with intense heat, capable of ripping through anything, and her simple curved blade stopped it.
It made me doubt my eyes. No doubt it was the power of the wielder more than her sword itself.
Thanks to the training I took under the demon lord's trusted Black Knight, I had gained some mastery of swordsmanship.
It was nothing Ifrit ever learned. I remembered how the knight praised me, told me it was all my own talent at work.
As a magic born, I was physically strong enough to be in the upper ranks of Leon's guard. Plus, I had mastered sword skills under the Black Knight's guidance.
It was far more than Ifrit's power that made me such a close confidant of the demon lord.
And yet, nothing I did affected the hero. The strikes and slashes I had worked so endlessly to perfect were all effortlessly parried away, gently turned aside before our blades could even clash in earnest.
Even when Ifrit's searing flames enveloped my entire body, the hero remained calm, shedding not a single drop of sweat.
Just as I'd first thought, she was on a completely different plane of existence. Then I felt Ifrit falling asleep in my body, a side effect of consuming too many magicules.
It was impossible to keep fighting. I lost, incapable of landing a single blow. I collapsed to the floor, confident that I had returned the favor to the demon lord.
I sort of wished I could live a while longer, but I doubted a hero would ever show mercy to a magic-born like me.
"Are you done?" I heard her say. "Why are you here?" It was a bit surprising. I was expecting death to come the next second. My head turned up to her. The hero was a hunter of evil, and I was her foe, a magic-born.
If she cut me down right now, I would have nothing to complain about. What whim of hers prompted these questions? Timidly, I opened my mouth.
Then I told her about how I was summoned to this world, how I had lived up to now. What I had done. It was selfish of me. I was a magic-born now. I had no right, no expectation, to be believed at all.
But it was true, having someone take an interest in me and listen to my story made me happy.
It left incontrovertible evidence that I had been alive all this time.
I could throw out my chest and proclaim to the world that I had lived, even if it was just in someone's memory.
That's what I wanted to do.
I doubted the hero would ever believe a magic-born's tale.
But that was fine.
If I just created a nook in her memory to occupy, that would work.
And yet, it's all right now. You've been through so much. She believed me. Her words brought tears to my eyes. The next thing I knew, I was clinging to her, crying. For the first time since I came to this world, relief embraced me as I expressed my true feelings to someone. I wound up coming under the hero's care.
Her face darkened at the sight of my burn scars.
I was used to them, the way they spread across half my body was proof that I was alive. The hero tried to use healing magic to do something about them. It didn't appear to work.
Merging with Ifrit had stabilized my body to its current state, scars and all.
She thought for a moment and then took a pretty mask out from a bag.
You know, she said, this mask helps boost your resistance to magic.
You might be able to use it to keep Ifrit at bay inside you. She gave it a loving caress, then handed it to me.
The instant I put the mask of magic resistance on, it immobilized Ifrit inside me and hid the burn scars across my body.
And that wasn't all.
With the will of Ifrit no longer dominating mine, all the oppressed emotions I felt over the years immediately welled out of me. The pangs of loneliness, the fear of becoming a magic born.
The deep shame of killing the first friend I ever made. The intense hatred I held for this unfair world. Putting on that mask helped me regain the emotions I had thought I had forsaken with my childhood. The hero held me tight until I was able to calm down.
I remember how scared I was after that for a while, so scared that I couldn't even talk to anyone except the hero.
But she never complained. She treated me warmly.
And little by little, she loosened the ropes around my heart, teaching me how to converse with others once more. I accompanied the hero wherever she went, hiding myself in a full-body robe. I was always following her, scared she'd leave me behind.
That was about when I was introduced to the Society of Adventurers.
I was, as other people at the time put it, a silent girl, one who always covered her face in a mask.
One who never ventured out past the hero's shadow. A useless piece of baggage.
One day, something happened to me at the society, which I had visited alongside the hero several times. A man, concerned after seeing how I joined her on all of her monster-slaying work, spoke up. "Is that child in the mask a girl?"
He asked. "Don't you think she should stay here this time? This'll be a dangerous one." All I could do was shiver at the idea. At the time, the hero was the only person on the planet I could muster the courage to trust. The hero meant everything to me, and I couldn't bear the thought of being separated from her. I was sure the grown-ups would kill me if they found out I was a magic-born. I had that much common sense, at least. The hero gave me a thin smile. "It'll be all right," she said in a reassuring tone.
"Everyone here's really nice, all right? You're a strong girl, too."
"It'll be fine." I think that's what made me do it. I wanted to live up to the hero's expectations, and I knew this couldn't go on forever.
Something about the way she spoke always seemed brimming with confidence, too.
It made me believe whatever she said was true. It was with a strange sense of calm, then, that I separated from her on that day. In the waiting room next to the society's front desk, I began studying. That was around when I learned that I was in the kingdom of Bloomond.
There were several other nations nearby, I found out, around the forest of Jura.
And that wasn't all.
When they weren't handling society issues, the workers there taught me arithmetic, as well as several different writing systems.
I listened intently to the passing adventurers as they spoke about the neighboring nations.
My knowledge of these other states and the balance of power between them was faint at first, but I still gained a working understanding.
To someone like me, who had hardly seen the inside of a school, the society became my place of learning. I studied magic, as well.
The society played home to sorcerers, shamans, magicians, and enchanters, as well as many others who were versed in magic ways.
I was lucky enough to build friendships with them, and they, in turn, taught me about the mysteries of the world. There was much about what they said that seemed unfathomable me. But what I needed most of all was to learn how to deal with elemental spirits. Ifrit, a high-level elemental, was merged with me. Apparently, this allowed me to harness his abilities without the formality of forging a pact with him. But remember, I still had my mask of magic resistance on. Carefully, I attempted to find an inroad to Ifrit. Soon I discovered ways to manipulate his skills without exacting a burden upon my own body. Somewhere along the line, I came to be known as the Conqueror of Flames. I was an elementalist, gifted in the arts of fire and explosive magic, and I had grown to the point that no one worried about me joining the hero on adventures. In fact,
She had fully accepted me now, not as a traveling companion, but as a full-fledged partner.
It made me so happy.
I had worked hard for so long to help her out, to have the woman who'd saved my life recognize me for who I was.
All the effort had paid off. Life was good.
Several years later, though, the hero went off on a journey.
Without me. I didn't know why. The hero must have had her motivations, much like I had mine. I intended to set off myself someday, so I had no right to complain about it.
Did she want to slay the demon lord I served?
No, the truth was, she had saved me, then left me.
I needed to find out why, perhaps, and I wanted her to accept me once more.
I wanted to show that I was alive, that I was human.
It was exactly that kind of selfish hope that proved I had no right to stop her in her tracks. I was already grown up, not some child naive in the ways of the world.
The droplets slipping down from behind the mask must have been my imagination. I made myself believe it was true as I watched her leave. Because I know I'll see you again.
The thought made me want to grow stronger than ever before.
I continued traveling after she left me, across many countries. I wanted to help people in their times of need, as she did.
Whether it was Ifrit's influence on me or not, my body had stopped growing at the age of 16 or 17. One of the demon lord's curses, I thought, but it nonetheless served me well on the road. A large number of adventurers were in the business of handling other people's dirty work, searching for rare plants in the forest, slaying monsters and harvesting them for useful materials, and so on. It was a line of work that stereotypically involved huge, lumbering frames and equally bulging muscles. Sheer strength bred respect and trust from others, since it meant one could hold one's own in a job that flirted with the line between life and death. The society of adventurers attracted the kind of people who lived free lives and were never tied down by any one nation.
If they were injured fighting a monster, they could expect no assistance from one government or another. Nations already had their armies of knights to protect them. They didn't need the aid of some dirty adventurer.
Sometimes a local lord would ask for their help rooting a monster out from their lands or villages, but there was no formal system in place for encouraging cooperation between nations and adventurers. It meant that nations could expand only into the range their armies could physically defend, small pockets of civilization in an otherwise wild land. There would be times when towns fell under attack from powerful monsters. Three-headed snakes, winged lions, and such. Whenever these so-called calamities appeared near a settlement, they would cause as much consternation as a full-scale war. Of course, one might expect governments to cooperate and create support systems that extended beyond national borders. And such agreements did exist, but such support always came after things were stable. In the meantime, it was seen as a country's own responsibility to defeat the monster in question. This was why those with full rights as city dwellers were granted special treatment, while the others had to make do with life in neighborhoods built in the hazardous areas around the walls.
Such people eventually acclimated to a life of being pillaged and exploited. The stronger among them saw an adventurer's career as a way to protect themselves. The wealth gap quickly grew between rich and poor.
It was a dog-eat-dog world, one where the weak had no recourse.
I wanted to protect them.
Just like the hero, who'd offered me the salvation I'd so deeply hoped for.
If I abandoned them, I would be no different from my demon lord. So I worked as hard as I could to be an ally to the weak.
And somewhere along the line, people started relying on me. Calling me a hero.
A dragon attacked the town, with enough force to equal an entire army.
A calamity-level foe, absolutely. Bloomond immediately declared a state of emergency and placed the nation on high alert.
I was one of the many people they enlisted.
A calamity-class monster was usually discovered once every several years, but this one was different.
No half-hearted strike would ever phase a dragon, and the nation's Knight Corps was too offensively weak to provide any support at all.
I myself provided all the offense I could for the effort, but my sword could do little against such a foe, and I was hardly much of a threat. If something wasn't done, it would ultimately lead to thousands of deaths, so I decided to call upon Ifrit, sleeping within my body this whole time. The dragon's stone-melting breath enveloped my body, but because I'd merged with Ifrit, it felt like nothing more than a passing breeze. By the time it realized I was impervious to its breath, that I was a force to be feared, it was already too late. Waves of white-hot flame whipped out of my hands, binding the dragon before it could flee.
In another few moments, it was burned alive. I, on the other hand, was left in a coma for a week afterward. The effort had sapped my magical force.
I was aging now, and I couldn't focus my spirit as well as I could in earlier years.
As my spirit flagged, so did my magic.
Ifrit, and my relationship with him, gave me more than enough magical energy to work with, but the vitality I needed to harness it was dying on me. I had failed to notice it draining, thanks to my body's lack of aging.
I'd had Ifrit held down that whole time, no wonder I'd been using up so much of it.
All's well that ends well, the dragon was defeated, after all, but if I had taken one step further, I might have released an enraged Ifrit, a concept far more terrifying than any dragon.
I recalled the past, my face tensed and pale.
If I wasn't careful, I could very well incinerate the people I swore to protect.
It might be time, I thought, to call it a day.
If I let myself grow any weaker, Ifrit could go berserk on me.
Retirement was something I had to consider, sooner or later.
I talked the matter over with Heinz, one of the managers who ran things around the Society of Adventurers.
If that's what it is, he said, I'd advise you to travel to the Kingdom of Inglesia.
They're looking for teachers in basic battle techniques over there. There's lots of ex-adventurers out there, but if you can teach your skills to people, you'll never be hurting for a job.
He handed me a reference letter I could use. Thank you, I replied. You've done so much for me. Ah, forget about it, he protested.
We're the ones who should be thanking you, Shizu. You've been a rock for all of us. He blushed. Well, have a nice trip, I suppose. If you get some free time, come back and visit.
They all saw me off before I left for good. It made me feel as if I belonged to this place. As if I had for years. I couldn't believe how happy it made me.
So it was that, toward the end of my career, I made the switch from adventurer to instructor. Chapter 4.
The Conqueror of Flames. So there we were. Back at the Goblin Village.
It had been only about 2 weeks, but I was seriously starting to miss it a little. Assuming you wanted to call it a village at all. It was more of an empty space with a fence around it. While we were gone, a few simple tents had been pitched around the area.
There were signs of progress, at least.
I spotted a large iron pot situated over the remains of the central campfire. Goblin cuisine used to be all about spit roasting, but now they'd added simmering to the mix.
This was a truly remarkable development. Where'd they get that thing?
Taking a closer look, I realized it was fashioned from the shell of a big turtle. Man, how much did they expand their hunting grounds while I was gone? I was glad they'd kept their home base safe, at least. The resident hobgoblins spotted our returning party quickly, greeting us with cheers and applause. I had rudely forgotten to bring souvenirs, but given the monster pelts and such I spotted drying here and there, proceeds from their hunting, no doubt, I was sure the dwarves would have everyone kitted up and clothed before long.
I'd like the goblins to make that stuff themselves later, but let's take it one step at a time. I tried looking around for Rigard so I could introduce the dwarves to him. I didn't need to. He ran right up to me. I thought he was just excited to see us, but he had something bothering him instead. Welcome back, he said before I could ask.
I hate to bother you so soon after returning, Sir Rimuru, but we have visitors. Visitors?
But I don't remember having any friends. I decided to let the dwarves show themselves around. They'd be living here for a while, and I was sure they were curious to see what it was like.
I also stowed the tools I'd brought along in an empty tent, figuring the covering would at least offer some protection against the elements.
Leaving our new residence to Riga, I had the elder guide me to our guests.
He took me to one of the larger tents, which had been converted into a sort of meeting room.
Who could it be?
I guess I'll find out, I thought as I bounced in. Once I passed under the flap, I stopped.
Inside were a bunch of goblins, the regular kind.
Several of them were well dressed, each one accompanied by a handful of servants. Some elders and their guards, maybe.
Nobody was armed. Not that I minded that. Before I could ask what was up, the goblins prostrated themselves on the floor. "It is an honor to meet you, O great master," they all shouted in unison.
"Please, listen to our most earnest of hopes." "Great master? I guess they mean me, but really, that's going too far."
They sure believed it, though. Their eyes couldn't have been more longing or resolute. There was no telling what they wanted, but I figured I'd hear them out. "All right. Go ahead."
"Oh, thank you for your generosity,"
one of the elders shouted.
"All of us here wish to join your throngs of followers, sir."
"Please, grant us your magnanimous kindness,"
the others said as they remained on the floor, eyes turned to me, before bowing low.
"Honestly, I didn't want to deal with this. We're just getting started with the rebuilding process here, guys. I don't have time to waste on you. I would have loved to simply shoo them off. But we did have a lack of manpower around here.
And I could already picture the turf wars these guys would want to spring upon us sooner or later.
Maybe it was best to take them in while we still could.
If they stab us in the back after that, we can just kill 'em all."
I wouldn't take kindly to traitors.
Rose-colored glasses would just get in the way when you were leading a pack of monsters.
You had to keep a cool head around them.
That was part of the reason I was willing to take these goblins in, because I wanted to prove to myself that I meant business. Once again, I reminded myself, if these guys turn out to be traitors, I will personally kill every one of them. It was amazing how I could think about killing people as if I were wondering where to go for lunch, though. It came as a surprise, but, hell, it beat hemming and hawing over every life decision I made.
Kept it simple.
By the way, if these were just the envoys, how many goblins were we talking overall?
I sighed. I might have a hell of a lot of names to think up soon.
The guards accompanying the goblin elders had gone back to their respective villages to report the news.
So what did they have to say? To sum up, their story went a bit like this. It all began with the recent disruptions to the order around the forest.
The other villages had de facto abandoned Riggards during the dire wolf attack, in part because they simply had no combat resources left to assign to the place. All the intelligent races in this forest, the orcs, the lizardmen, and the ogres, too, were starting to step up and stake their claims on this wood. There had been smaller arguments along those lines before, but there was also a sort of silent agreement that nobody would let it get to armed conflict. With the forest's one and true overseer out of the picture, however, there were more than a few races out there ready to vent some steam. Monsters, in general, had a tendency to puff up and engage in regular displays of power.
Now every village in the forest was rapidly preparing itself to kick some ass. It was only a matter of time before something got the ball rolling.
And goblins, the wimpiest kids on the block, were doomed to let most of these other races lay total waste to them. This, naturally, alarmed most of the other goblin elders. The moment they got involved in this cross-forest turf war, it'd be over for them. So they held a conference, talked it over for several days, and were all too blockheaded to come up with any decent ideas.
Not that I would have expected them to.
News of the impending direwolf attack came in the midst of this, but their attention was focused elsewhere. Rigard's village was left for dead and all but forgotten.
Their talks continued, with no miracles in sight.
Just as the village's food stocks were starting to run low, they heard word of yet another new forest menace, rumors of massive, dark beasts, piloted by people riding on their backs.
They sped through the trees, as if traversing flat plains, and they utterly vanquished the more powerful monsters of the forest.
Who were they?
The concept made the goblins tremble with fear and surprise.
They were apparently ex-goblins.
Opinions were split on how to handle this. Some suggested to travel to them immediately and beg for protection.
Others found the tale too extraordinary to swallow, concerned that it might be a trap and refusing to believe that the ex-goblins would have no reason to trick them. Trap or not, though, there was no guarantee this new race will accept them.
Especially since they'd abandoned Rigard's village. Forgiveness appeared a futile hope for many of the elders. Even goblins were capable of shame, it turned out.
In the end, realizing they had reached the far end of their intellect, the conference ended with a total lack of any concrete conclusion.
So the side that sought our protection decided to travel over here. Now it all made sense.